Hi, I'm Claire.
And I'm Abby. Today we'll be talking about the nervous system, the system that controls all systems. It controls most of your basic needs such as walking, speaking, swallowing, breathing, and learning, and controls how our body reacts in an emergency.
We will talk about the two major sections in the nervous system, the central, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which connects all the nerves in our body to our brain.
We will also be talking about the functions within the peripheral nervous system, which are the somatic, the voluntary actions, and the autonomic, the involuntary actions. The two functions in the autonomic system are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
We will talk about the afferent and efferent neurons that play a part in transmitting signals to our bodies and the different types of neurons, such as the multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar.
And finally, two diseases that affect the nervous system, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Okay, so let's begin. First of all, the nervous system is separated into two different sections, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Both of these systems work together to coordinate bodily functions by transmitting sensory information and processing it.
The central nervous system, also known as the CNS, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain includes all the complex functions such as our emotions and thoughts. The cerebrum is the bulk of the brain, which is supported by the brainstem and divided into two hemispheres. From there, it's divided further into 4 lobes. The frontal, responsible for cognitive skills. The parietal lobe processes sensory information through touch, pain, and pressure. The occipital lobe is responsible for visual cues. And finally, the temporal lobe processes auditory information, which includes language.
Along with the temporal lobe, Wernicke's area is a region of the brain responsible for written and spoken language. The hippocampus is a short-term memory keeper, and the amygdala controls sexual and social behaviors.
The other part of the CNS is the spinal cord, which controls our basic reflexes that work without the input of the brain. And it transmits sensory signals from the PNS, which includes the somatic and autonomic systems. Even the central nervous system functions that much on its own, it still needs the PNS to keep the brain in touch with external environments. It does this with sensory receptors such as the eyes, nose, tongue, ears, and skin.
With what information sensory receptors transmit, it triggers the somatic or the autonomic nervous system. The somatic is the voluntary reactions you think about doing based on the information your senses send to your brain. Your body receives these signals through sensory neurons or afferent neurons. Then once your brain processes the situation, that's sending information through motor neurons or efferent neurons to the body. Afferent neurons carry the information to the CNS, and the efferent neurons carry that information from the CNS to the rest of the body. So, just remember that sensory neurons are afferent and motor neurons are efferent.
The autonomic nervous system are all the involuntary actions that don't need the brain's input to happen. And what I mean is that if you touch a hot stove, sensory neurons will send the information to your spinal cord, which will cause you to move instinctively. This information doesn't reach the brain. Regulation of bodily functions such as heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, pupil dilation, urination, and sexual arousal, all which happen in the autonomic nervous system naturally and unconsciously.
Not to forget that another autonomic function are these reflexive actions, coughing, sneezing, swallowing, and vomiting. Believe it or not, but the autonomic system has subdivisions of its own, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. The sympathetic prepares our body for action by making us stress when in the presence of a threat or an injury. It is also known as the fight or flight response. It does this by increasing our heart rate and blood pressure, dilating our pupils, activating our adrenal cortex, which produces adrenaline. It even cuts the blood supply to our reproductive and digestive systems, so our lungs and muscles can have more blood available when we have to take action. It is active all the time, whether you are or aren't in a state of panic.
The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. It helps our body relax by decreasing our heart rate, increasing the blood flow to our reproductive system, producing saliva, and encouraging waste release. Both of these systems work together to create homeostasis within our bodies. That's all for the PNS, and moving on to the structure of the neuron. Hooray!
You can think of the structure as a tree. This part here, which looks like branches, are the dendrites. They receive information from other neurons. The trunk is like the axon. It sends signals to other neurons. And along the axons are myelins, a fatty material which acts like insulation. The exposed parts of the axon are called nodes or branchia, and these nodes allow signals to travel faster down the neuron. Most of the neurons in our body are multipolar. There are other types such as bipolar and unipolar. Multipolar neurons have multiple dendrites that leave the cell body and an axon leading the way. Your motor neurons are multipolar as they send information from your brain to the rest of the body. Bipolar neurons have two branches leaving the cell body, one being the dendrites and the other axon. These are associated with the auditory and visual systems such as the retina. Unipolar neurons have a single branch that leaves the cell body. On one end are the dendrites that receive incoming signals, and on the other, an axon transmitting the information out. The sensory neurons are unipolar. The signals you receive on your sensory receptors travel to the CNS, just like a one-way transmission.
We will leave that there and move on. Our neurons are surrounded and protected by neuroglia or glial cells. They are the non-neuronal cells in the CNS and the PNS. The glial cells in the CNS are the astrocytes, microglial, ependymal, and the oligodendrocytes. Astrocytes are abundant and versatile. They connect blood supply to the neurons and exchange materials between the neurons and capillaries. They can also be identified by their star shape. Microglial cells are the main immune defense and protection of invading microorganisms in the brain and the spinal cord. Ependymal cells line the cavities in the brain and the spinal cord. They create, release, and circulate cerebrospinal fluid. Oligodendrocytes produce an insulating barrier called the myelin sheath. In the PNS, satellite cells are which surround and support body cells. The Schwann cells wrap around axons, creating an insulating myelin.
The purpose of neurons are their connections, transmitting information from one to another. Synapses are the meeting point between two neurons, and without it, the whole system would collapse and there would be no communication between neurons. Synapses help us remember and learn. Our synapses have two main ways to transfer signals, electrical and chemical, but it depends on how important the information is. Electrical synapses are compared to a text message in terms of how fast the message is sent. Chemical synapses are much easier to control and are used more often than electrical ones for that purpose. They send information to specific recipients. If all of our synapses were electrical, then our body would be on overload, causing neurons around to be activated, stimulating our muscle fibers and organs every time they send information to each other. This would cause our body to become exhausted and ultimately die. Well, we'll end this small, concise presentation with two diseases that affect our nervous system.
Alzheimer's is a progressive disease in which brain cell connections and the cells themselves degenerate and die, eventually destroying memory and other important mental functions such as functioning, thinking, and reasoning, and interferes with daily lives. Our synapses helps us with remembering, so in Alzheimer's, our synapses aren't working the way they should. There are 7 stages for Alzheimer's. In the beginning, it may just be you forgetting your keys or not be able to find the right word in a conversation. But by stage 7, you will be unable to speak and may even forget how to swallow.
Parkinson's is a disorder of the central nervous system that affects movement, often including tremors. In this case, the frontal lobe has been affected. Cognitive skills are also affected, such as the difficulty of thinking and understanding. There are 5 stages for Parkinson's. Here are some symptoms for each of them. The first is stiffness in limbs or hands. Second, being loss of facial expressions and speech abnormalities. Third is a loss of balance and slowness. 4, difficulty moving on their own. And 5th, a person will frequently fall and freeze while doing basic movement. They may even have hallucinations or delusions. And that's it, the whole complete overview of the nervous system. We hope you enjoyed. I'd like to thank Abby for doing the smart stuff.
And I'd like to thank Claire for doing the artsy stuff. Thank you for watching.